Hello, everyone. My name is Jared. I'm one of the team members from Podcast Movement, and today we're excited to have with us Mark Asquith with Rebel Base Media. And Mark, of course, is going to talk about uncovering the listener acquisition flow and using it to find genuine podcast listeners. And Mark, for some people, they'd be like, acquisition? What are we talking about? Some of that is some fancy wording, but really it's just about helping people with discoverability and growing their audience and stuff. But Mark, we really appreciate you and your generosity to the podcast community. You've been a very good podcast member for a long time, so it's an absolute honor to have you here today. So thank you for that. And why don't we, to kick things off, why don't you just tell a little people about you and what you're doing with Rebel Base Media?
Absolutely. And always a pleasure to see you. And thank you for everything you guys do with Podcast Movement. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of Rebel Base Media. We make the podcast hosting platform Captivate.fm. And it's an interesting position for me to be in. You know, I got into podcasting back in 2013 and I attended, in fact, Jared and I were talking about it. I attended a couple of podcast conferences very, very early on. And one of my first ones was Podcast Movement, where I met Jared and Dan back in 2015 at Fort Worth, and just been a staunch supporter ever since. So, you know, podcasting for me is something that came after a marketing career, a digital design and a digital agency career. We've built agencies that work with brands across the world. So for me, podcasting is very, very interesting. I love podcasting. I'm fascinated by podcasting and I absolutely adore the community. I love building things to help podcasters. But what's fascinating is that my day-to-day job is actually building things that people want to use. And your podcast is no different. So I've all these marketing skills that I've built over the years, and these brand skills and these communication skills and these ideas and just all of these different types of knowledge have come together into how I approach podcasting, which has helped me to arrive on how to help you to build a more engaged fan base, a more loyal fan base, a fan base that is a little bit more open to sticking with you for the long term. And I developed this concept called the listener acquisition flow, and then how to really attract people in using this flow through things like high quality trailer projects, and just acquiring listeners in a really positive and long-term manner. So I'm going to talk you through some of those ideas. I'm going to give you some things that you can implement. I'm going to talk to you about, you know, why sometimes our marketing doesn't work. We'll be taking some questions as well. Jared, just a heads up, I can't see the chat. I can see the private chat between you and I, but feel free just to drop those questions in. I know you're on hand for that, so thank you so much.
I've got it. We're on it.
You're the man. Always. So let's dig in. All right, let's take a look at what's going on. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to introduce you to this concept. Give me a second there. Here we are, Keynote. So you should be now seeing my screen. You can see that we're going to talk about building your audience by picking the ultimate trailer format to get more genuine listeners. And this is all tied to this listener acquisition flow, right? So I'm going to educate you on all this stuff. In fact, I'm going to talk to you about 3 specific things. The content hamster wheel. I'm going to talk to you about understanding that listener acquisition flow. And I'm going to talk to you about building the perfect podcast trailer. If you've got any questions, just bring them up throughout the session and I will answer them on Twitter as well. Afterwards, at Mr. Asquith, I'm always over there. That's always just the place that I'm conversing the most. So any questions whatsoever, please do just let me know. So the content hamster wheel. We're all really busy, aren't we, as podcasters? And it's really, like, podcasting is fantastic. I really adore podcasting. I've produced about 1,300 episodes of my own podcast, everything from teaching podcasting with the Podcast Accelerator through to my Star Wars podcast, Spark a Rebellion. I just love podcasting. But what we often do is we know that we want more listeners. We know that we want just more people to enjoy our content. However, what we do is we're so focused on creating that we find ourselves on this hamster wheel. We just produce content after content after content. And it's, sadly, you know, this is not the field of dreams. This is not build it and they will come, something that I'm sure you've heard from other people in PMU. So what this content hamster wheel manifests itself as is we produce an episode of content and we kind of do some basic marketing. And then we get on to producing the next episode of content. Then we do some basic marketing and we go on to producing the next level of content. We do some basic marketing, we produce the next episode, and we rinse and repeat. But all that marketing really boils down to is one single call to action. And this is, of course, changed really recently. I'm going to talk about the recent changes that Apple has made and a few other people have made as well. Because that one call to action that we all give is, hey, look, I've got a podcast. Go and subscribe right now. So we put a tweet out. I've got the wonderful Jared Easley from Podcast Movement and Starve the Doubts right here on my podcast. And I write about it on Twitter. And the call to action is go and subscribe right now. The problem is that really kind of doesn't work. It just doesn't work unless we can send so many tweets or Instagram posts and Facebook posts that we're constantly in the psyche of people. That simply doesn't work. So this is a content hamster wheel where we just do one episode and a little bit of cursory marketing, and then we ask people to subscribe and then go on to the next episode and just keep rinsing and repeating. In fact, this is a visualization of it. The usual best case podcast marketing cycle looks like this. Over on the left-hand side, we've got like a pre-release section where, maybe the day before or a couple of days before, again, let's say that I've got the wonderful Jared Easley from Podcast Movement and Starve the Doubts. I'll do some teaser content. Maybe I'll say, come and join me and Jared on Tuesday when I release my episode. And I'll maybe tweet it. I'll do a pull quote. I'll do something like an audiogram, pop it on Instagram, stick it on Facebook, and so on and so forth. That's that teaser section, that pre-release section over on the left. And then that middle bit, that release week, like that's the bit where we do the heavy stuff. The cyclical kind of, I'll add it to my buffer queue. I'll stick it on Hootsuite. Again, I'll put a link to my website, put a beautiful picture of Jared looking really good on there. And I'm just going to talk about some fantastic pull quotes even more. I'm going to put a link to my podcast player on there. Maybe I'll pop it on YouTube with some captions. And I go through this week of episode marketing cycle. And there's nothing wrong with that. But that's all we do until this bit over on the right-hand side, this recycling bit where we say, well, look, I'll add this to my buffer queue again. And I'll say, remember when we had Jared on? That was a year ago. And then it was 2 years ago and 3 years ago. I still get tagged now from podcast episodes on Twitter that I did in 2015. Literally, I still get tagged them, I don't know, once every 3 weeks because they're just in this ongoing rinse and repeat, recycle kind of phase. And this entire best case podcast marketing cycle is what most podcasters do. So they produce the content and then they do this cycle and then they produce another bit of content. They do this cycle, but it's all geared up to asking for subscriptions. So if you look at the bottom right there, hey, I've got a podcast, go and subscribe right now. That's what we all ask. Okay. The problem though with this is we measure downloads or listens, if we're looking at something like Apple Podcasts or Spotify's inbuilt analytics, excuse me, we measure downloads. We want listeners, but we ask for subscribers, which is weird, right? So let's recap that. We want downloads or listeners. We actually genuinely want listeners, people like you and I, but we ask for subscribers. Now, the problem with this is, number one, inherent to the word subscribe, which we'll get to in a second, because that has changed very, very recently, which I think is wonderful. But there's a little bit of disparity between those three things. And we don't really ask for the one that we really care about, which is listeners. We don't ask for listeners because we don't know how to. That's really weird. It's really hard to ask, go and please be a listener. It's weird, isn't it? It sounds odd, So we continue to ask for these subscribers. The other problem on the other side of this is that as a listener or a prospective listener, someone that might be interested, they don't really care about us. Like listeners, if I'm completely honest, they're just not that bothered. I love my podcast and I love podcasting. But the stranger on the street or the person that I meet at a conference or at a gig or in a bar, they don't really care about my podcast. Certainly not like I do. And they don't care enough to listen. Why would they? They don't care enough until we make them. Okay, we have to make them. And suddenly we start to see some more disparity creeping in. Well, how can we make someone care? How can we turn someone into a fan when we're asking them to subscribe? Because they don't feel right together. You know, they don't feel right together. There's that kind of gap. You know, if someone came up to you and said, just can you subscribe to this thing? You'd be thinking, well, what? Why? Why would I do that? You know, imagine someone walking up to you in the street with a business card. Hey, can you subscribe to this thing? Of course I can. You know, that's what happens. You stick it in your back pocket, you forget about it. The overarching factor here, when it comes to one of the challenges regarding just that go and subscribe call to action, that cycle not working, is that we ask way too much, way too soon. We ask way too much, way too soon. Let me give you an example. This is Ron Burgundy looking like a car salesman. So let's assume that he's a car salesman for the purposes of this delightful example. Imagine that you walk onto a car lot and you are thinking to yourself, well, I think I need a different car. You know, the kids are growing up. We need a little bit more room. I need a car that's a little bit bigger, maybe a little bit better on fuel economy. And that looks kind of fly. Looks kind of nice for me. So you walk onto the car lot. And this guy, Ron Burgundy, I don't know why he's a car salesman in this picture, but Ron Burgundy turns up. The second you walk on the car lot, he says, right, Marco, let's go and do the paperwork, shall we? What? We've just met. I don't know what car I want. I don't know if I'm going to like this car. I don't know if I'm going to like that car. I'm not taking it for a spin. I've not got to know it. I've not got to get a feel for it. I don't know whether you are a nice person, the person that's hosting this car at me, and that is telling me that I should buy this car. I don't know if you are good. Are you going to do me over? Are you going to do me a deal? Are you a good person to do the business with? None of this stuff. We don't know any of this stuff because the car salesman has just come along, seen you walking onto the lot, and thought, prospect. Now that happens with us as podcasters. Someone walks onto the Twitter lot and they see that we exist. And the first tweet that they see from us is a recycled, go and subscribe to my podcast. Oh, no, really? Come on. Come on. I'm not going to do that. You know, the old marketing tenets, people buy from people that they know, that they like, and that they trust. The old classic marketing cliches. We're forgetting them as podcasters. Why? Because it's easy to be the salesman. It's easy because when we schedule stuff and automate it, that's one more thing that we don't have to worry about for another month. We can forget it. And look, I am doing marketing because I've got Buffer queued up. But then we wonder why it's not working. And it's because we're doing this, all right? We're being the salesperson. We're being pushy. We're asking too much way too soon. Now let's get to this word subscribe. This is a bit of an out-of-date slide, actually. I should have updated it with the Infinite Dial 2020. I'm fairly sure the stats were reasonably similar. But you see down at the bottom there, you've got 38% of people there saying that they believe that you have to pay to subscribe to podcasts. Now, Apple and all of these other kind of directories recently started to go through the process of changing the word subscribe to the word follow. Now, that's great, all right? That is great because it means that there's less focus on the fact that, you know, I've kind of got to be really deeply embedded into the podcast that I can't miss an episode. You know, it's a bit more casual. There's less pressure on the potential listener. But the other reason that they've introduced this change from subscribe to follow is so that they can reintroduce the word subscribe as a paid subscription option. So we know that with Apple Podcast subscriptions, I can pay to subscribe, and the same with Spotify subscriptions, you know, because guess what? We subscribe to everything. Amazon Prime, Netflix, you know, whatever, Harry's, anything, we subscribe to it, all right? So when we put all of this together, the marketing that we're doing and some of that legacy marketing, some of that recycling marketing that we're doing is probably starting to look a little bit messy. And to top it off, according to my good friend, Mr. Daniel J. Lewis, one of the nicest people, I'm going to say the second nicest person in podcasting after Jared, Daniel J. Lewis says that There are around 2 million podcasts in the world right now. Like when I got into podcasting back in the day, there were about 190,000. Things are growing really quickly. Okay, so what does this mean? We've got a lot more competition. There's a lot more attention that is being vied for in the eyes of the podcast listener or the prospective podcast listener. And that is why your podcast marketing, all that stuff that I've talked about, is not enough. It's not enough. It can't be. We do it as podcasters, how I've just described it. We do it because it's quick and it's automated. And it feels like we're doing kind of marketing, but we have to get more savvy. And this is where the listener acquisition flow comes in. Now, I know it sounds fancy. I've been trying to think of something cooler for it, but I'm really not that good at stuff like that. So I'm going to stick with it. The listener acquisition flow, all right? This is just really a way of acquiring genuine listeners, okay? So not worrying about the downloads, actually acquiring people, genuine listeners. And I've actually written a little goal here, so you'll see it over there on the slide. The goal of the listener acquisition flow is to give people enough of us, the podcasters, give people enough of us at the right time to cultivate loyalty, recurring listens, and advocacy. One more time. The listener acquisition flow is intended to be a strategy that gives people enough of us at the right time to cultivate loyalty, recurring listens, and advocacy. So what does it look like? Why should you care? Apart from because it sounds really clever. It doesn't, does it? Imagine that being in a bar and reeling that out. They'd just laugh you out of the bar, wouldn't they? This is the listener acquisition flow. 5 stages to a listener. Now, you'll notice that I've left subscriber in. I was going to change it for this session because of these new tweaks that have gone on in podcasting, with Apple Podcast subscriptions and so on. But I think it's pertinent to make the distinction between what we deem to be a previous subscriber and that bit up at the top on the far right. You see that word there, the word fan. I'm going to talk about that because that's important. So I've sort of left it in. I've sort of toyed with this idea, but I'm going to roll with it because I think it's important to start to understand some of the future of podcasting as well. So the listener acquisition flow comprises 5 distinct stages of listenership. 5 distinct stages of listenership. The lurker, the explorer, like I'm imagining sort of a social media marketing world sort of hat on, that kind of explorer hat. The listener, the subscriber, and the fan. What we try and do is we ask people to subscribe and follow, okay, in the more modern world. We try to acquire listeners right up the ladder, right up the top, when people really do care about us. But the problem is, new listeners are down at the bottom. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get, because it's easy for us, because we can say go and subscribe, because you have the ability to go and follow or subscribe in a podcast app, we assume that people will. Just because the technical capability to do that exists, we think people will. And what we do is we forget the human element. We forget that actually, if I'm going to listen to your podcast, I want to be wined and dined a little bit. I want to be courted. I want to be treated well. I want to be teased with what's coming. I want to be told why I should care. And I want to just be invigorated enough to want to do something. It's about a courtship, all right? It's building the knowing, the liking, and the trusting. So the subscribers, they're sort of right at the top. They're right at the top of the ladder. It'd be great to have subscribers from day one and people that really love what you do and really follow what you do so ardently that they can't miss an episode. But the new listeners, the ones that we really want to target, are right at the bottom, okay? Right at the bottom. And their time is valuable. Their time is valuable. So I did a fantastic episode with Jared Easley, Starve the Doubts and Podcast Movement, one of the finest people that you're ever likely to meet. Everyone should go and listen to it. It's 45 minutes of pure gold. We touch on everything from how to survive imposter syndrome to how to build one of the world's biggest and brightest conferences. It's one of the best episodes you will ever listen to. Go and give me 45 minutes of your time by subscribing right now. You see how everything except that last sentence tracked well. The marketing pattern was there. The right wording was there. The excitement was there, and then I ruined it by asking you to give me 45 minutes of your time on a tweet, on an Instagram post, on a Facebook post. All I should add, platforms where we spend time scrolling. Transient. Our job is to respect people's time, is to make sure that prospects, but potential new listeners, understand that we aren't asking too much too soon. So let's talk about each one of these types of people, because what we can do is we can really dig deep into the mentalities of these people from a marketing perspective and start to understand how to nurture them. So Jared is always a great person to talk to, without a shadow of a doubt. And I've got no doubt that people would want to listen to a brand new episode about what Jared has done for the last year, about how he's grown Podcast Movement and some of the fantastic work that he does in the community. But I can't ask them to subscribe because it's too much. Instead, what I got to do is respect that most people that know about me, maybe people on my email list like me a little bit more. Maybe people that sort of have met me a little bit in person, like some of the warmer leads, if you like. I don't like calling them leads, but for want of a better word, some of these leads on my Twitter may know me a little bit more from an event, so I can take a little bit more liberty with them. But the vast majority of people that we want to listen to our podcast are the lurkers, and they have kind of heard of you. Maybe they've seen you passing by on Twitter. Maybe they've seen you sort of, kind of, maybe talking at an event. Maybe they've heard you on other podcasts, and that's a whole other talk. We can talk about the discoverability triangle, but one of the tenets of that is that to activate potential listeners who already know about podcasting, a guest strategy is a very positive thing to do. So maybe the lurker has heard of you a little bit. Now, a great example of this is when we get new podcasters coming to Captivate, and they're like, well, I know I want to start my podcast, but what you got to help me? And we'll give them the how to start a podcast course that we've got and all that good stuff that everyone's got. But I'll also say to them, well, just go and follow me on Twitter or just come over to Facebook. Let's just have a chat. Let's just see what we're all about. Let's just see how we get along. And those people are in that lurker category. Okay, so they could be a prime kind of listener for my show, The Podcast Accelerator, which is about helping podcasters to grow their audience. But if I tell them to subscribe straight away, they're just like, oh, here we go. He's in sales pitch mode. They see straight through me, okay? So they get to know me. They've kind of heard of me a little bit. And then they become explorers. After a little while, they become explorers. And they want to sort of sample what I do. They're like, all right, this Mark guy is, he gets about a little bit. I saw him at PMU. Fairly sure I saw him in LA at PME. He seems to be producing a lot of content. Maybe what he says is worthwhile checking out. So guess what I do as the show owner, the creator? I go and ruin it again. I go and tell them to subscribe. I've just put the explorer off. All right. However, if we can keep them engaged, maybe we can turn them into the third phase of this flow, which is they become a listener. Now, this is what we think we want as a podcaster. A listener will listen, but not always. All right. So I listen to some of the spy podcasts out there. I listen to Secrets and Spies. I listen to Why Are Dads by Alex Steed. I listen to Rock on Tours with Gary Kemp. Don't laugh at me, but I do. I think it's brilliant. The David Coverdale episode was excellent. But it doesn't matter to me if I miss an episode. All right. I love them. I love those podcasts. But if I go away and I miss a couple of episodes, that's cool. I just look back through the library and I pick the ones that I want to listen. So it doesn't matter to me if I don't listen to everything. I still love them, but I'm not diehard. Okay. But most people kind of stop there. They think that if they've got someone listening, that's enough. However, it's not true. A subscriber, or as we should now maybe term it, a follower, is someone who does strictly follow what you do. And that is someone who will listen to every single episode that you put out whenever they can. Now, obviously, they may not go through the back catalogue. They may not go back through if they go on holiday, but they will make you the first person that they listen to when they get back. And that's the subtle difference between the listener and the subscriber. And at the very, very top is the best thing that we could ever hope for. It's a genuine fan. It is a genuine fan. Someone that never misses an episode, that will share, that will advocate for you, and that will probably at some point pay you for something. Like with our Star Wars show, with Spark a Rebellion. It's a hobby show. We have a laugh with it. It's just something that we enjoy doing, but we do have fans that pay us via Patreon. It's not much, but it covers our hosting costs. And off we go. They are fans. They never miss an episode, and they are there when we need them. They will advocate for us. They will do anything that we ask them to do, and they will share just through the sheer goodwill that they have for us. And you'll spot it. You have fans already. You know people that will do that for you. And I'm the same with like Jared and Dan. If Jared calls, I answer. It's been like that for 6 years. It will be like that for 6 and 60 more. That is how it works. Okay. And that is the know, like, and trust complete. A fan. Okay. So that's a listener acquisition flow. And what we've got to understand is that those types of people exist. But I know you're thinking, Marco, calm down. What the heck do we do with this? Don't worry. I'm going to tell you. What we have to do is learn how to convert each person into the next type of person. So this is actually where it gets quite fun. Okay, I've got a pen and a paper that I keep here all the time. And I literally, these sections here, I'm building out a new podcast, which Jared will be on. And, I've got a load of notes for it here that will help people to move up this flow. Like I practice this with every podcast that I put out. So what is it? Okay. Moving people from left to right, bottom to top, lurker to fan. Okay. Someone that's heard of you, kind of, the lurker. What we do is we pull them in with a 90-second or a 2-minute trailer. Okay. Now you can go and listen to my trailer. I put it on the top of my website. I had it pinned to the top of my Twitter profile until last week when I just quickly replaced it with a Twitter list that I've built, but the trailer will be back next week. What I do is, earlier I said that, we build up some goodwill and people sort of start to get to know us a little bit, and then I go and ruin it by asking them to subscribe and spend 45 minutes with myself and the person on my podcast without even courting them a little. You remember I said that I ruin it by asking them to subscribe? What I do is I change my call to action and I develop a trailer, which I'm going to share the format of a little bit later. I develop a trailer, and every call to action, I push to that trailer. So, again, using Twitter as the example, because it's my favorite platform, I would always say to someone, sure, in my cycle of episode marketing, I'll give people the link. I'll say, look, by the way, I talked to Jared. Here's the link to the episode. But my general marketing pattern for my podcast is always to send people to the trailer. Now, why is that? Well, like we said, people's time is valuable, right? I'm probably not going to buy a ticket to a movie until I've seen the trailer. I remember when I came to Podcast Movement, what did Jared and Dan show me? It was the amazing video that they'd had very quickly edited. Props to the editors on that one. Showing a 2-minute trailer for the event. It's brilliant. It's genius. Okay? So we've got to do the same. We've got to apply those kind of marketing principles from other media to our podcasts. So when we are transient in people's minds, when someone has heard of us, kind of, our calls to action need to send them to something that is not too much of a time investment for them. Something that if they hate it, so someone listens to my podcast, they're like, who is this English guy that is spouting about podcasting? I ain't in for this. That's all right. We're not gonna be liked by everyone. That's cool. That's the way it is. That's nice. That's a good thing. So they've not spent long deciding that they dislike me, or they've not spent long deciding that they love us. Okay? So that's what we're going to do. First and foremost, send people to a trailer. Now, I am going to give you a trailer format later that works because that's important. So don't worry, I am going to give you that. Next, what about when someone's listened to the trailer? What about when someone has sort of got a feel for us? So they know that my music is rock music on my intro. They know that it's me. I'm a bit brash. Sometimes I drop an F-bomb now and again on my podcast. They know how I talk. I talk a little bit fast. That is what it is. That's just me. They've got a feel for me in the trailer and they think, actually, I'm going to give this kid a go. I'm going to shoot for that. We're going to listen to an episode. Well, what I do in my trailer is I don't dead end them. So a really strong business lesson and a really strong relationship lesson that I learned very, very early on in business, way back when I didn't have gray hairs, was to never dead end someone. Even if I can't help, I should always curate a resource that can help. Okay. In business, what that means is that if someone says, hey, Marco, can you do some podcast coaching for me? I said, you know what? I really can't. I'm really sorry. Really busy building Captivate. But here are 3 people that are brilliant at it. Rather than saying no, I say no, but. Okay? What we do as a podcaster is we don't dead end people. So in our trailer, we just... oh, I almost hate saying it, like it makes me cringe. We never say things in isolation like the following. We never say, this is the Podcast Accelerator. Go and listen for free in your podcast app of choice. Wait a sec. So I've got to fire up my old phone. I've got to fire up Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I've got to find the episode. And then I've got to scroll through and choose what I want to. Oh man, I ain't going to do that. I'm not going to do that. Okay. So we've killed the explorer's curiosity because we've asked them to take a leap that requires thinking. Instead, what we have to do is curate content. So that explorer that has listened to the trailer and that's ready to roll and wants that content, we give them the next step: clarity, simplicity. Okay. So what we do is we look back through our download analytics. So you log into Captivate or your hosting platform of choice. You log into Captivate. You look over the last 3 months or the last 60 days or the last 30 days, whatever you're comfortable with, and you look at what the most frequently downloaded episode is, the most popular episode that you have in your library. Now, for me, over the last 2 months, the most popular episode that I've done in the Podcast Accelerator is an episode entitled, How Many Downloads Do I Need to Monetize My Podcast? So now I re-record my trailer every month, and during the middle of it, I will say something like, this is the Podcast Accelerator. Of course, it's available for free in your podcast app of choice. And I highly recommend that if you enjoy the show and you're serious about your podcast, that you listen to episode 261, which is entitled, How Many Downloads Do I Need to Monetize My Podcast? I've put a link in the show notes, and there's a call to action in the Captivate embedded player if you're listening on the web as well, that will take you directly to that episode. Don't make me think. Give me what I need. Okay. So that curated content is vital. And I do update my trailer. I don't know, once every 6 weeks, once every 2 months, using that data. So once we've curated people, they're an explorer, and we've given them the first thing to listen to, what we then do is we try to convert them to being a listener. Now, in an ideal world, someone falls in love with you and they skip the queue and they go straight to being a fan. That does happen, but that's an ideal world scenario. Wouldn't it be lovely? Okay. Our job is to move people up to being a listener. Now, how do we do that? Well, relatable segments, involvement, and behind-the-scenes access. So what I would do is, and we do this with the Star Wars podcast, which is very, 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 very powerful, okay? We do relatable segments. So what our next biggest assumption is as podcasters is that I do a 45-minute episode with Jared, and I know it's going to be good because Jared is always good. But I can't assume that someone's going to like that entire 45-minute episode, but I do because I'm a podcaster and I love my podcast. So what I have to do is break down my episode into relatable segments that give me the most chance of hooking a listener with something. Take cues from TV game shows and from radio shows, the drive time show. They've always got like top of the hour is the news. Quarter past the hour is the weather, or it's the traffic. Then you've got like a little quiz, or you've got, they've got these segments. We can do the same. So what I do, again, with Gary, who I run Spark Rebellion with, who's our head of design at Captivate, we run the Star Wars podcast. We've got a news segment. which is ideal for the nostalgic geeks like me to go and listen and catch up with Star Wars news in 20 minutes. We've also got a review and discussion section, which, do you know what? I might not be that bothered about because I'm not reading anything. I don't have time for it. Maybe I'm into something else. I'm binging something on Netflix with Sam, whatever. I'm just not reading anything in Star Wars right now. So the review and discussion section doesn't really interest me. That's all right. That's quite cool. But I still tune in for the news. And we've got a segment that we call the Random Spotlight, which is just some like bizarre thing from Star Wars lore, some background of something, excuse me, in Star Wars that we bring up. We're like, oh, this week's Random Spotlight is the ice cream maker from Empire Strikes Back. And people like that one particular segment. And we know this because people have told us. So we give this relatable set of segments so that the listener, the first time they tune in, they've got more chance of sticking to one piece of the episode. Now, of course, they might like all of it or 2 bits of it or 5 out of 10 or whatever, but at least we're spreading our bets, okay? We can also do that with involvement, and we can also do that with behind-the-scenes access. Now, what I would always do with that one is the involvement. Okay, someone listens to the episode, all right? And I did this with a chap called Rick McAvoy. I was actually the explorer on his podcast. It wasn't me converting him to a listener of mine. I was tuning into his Photography Explained podcast, which is great. So what I did was, and we do this for our shows, is let's say someone reaches out on Twitter, which is what I did with Rick, okay? I would say something like, just tuned into episode 12. It was brilliant. Really enjoyed it. Thanks for that, Rick. What I would then do, and this is what Rick does, is I would then say, hey, look, Jared mentioned on Twitter that he tuned in to episode 12. So on episode 13, I'm going to give him a shout out. And I'm going to say on Twitter by reply or Facebook, Instagram, email, whatever. Hey, Jared, I gave you a shout out in episode 13. How nice is that? People want to be involved. The same with behind the scenes access. Hey guys, look, I'm going to be live on Facebook. I'm going to do a live behind the scenes recording of the Podcast Accelerator. It's going to be on Wednesday at 4 p.m. Come along. That'll be awesome. You don't have to, there's no pressure, but I'll do a little, we'll have a little bit of a chat beforehand, maybe get some people on and we'll do a bit of a live chat before and after the recording, but I'm going to be there. So we let people in. Okay. And that transforms people from being transient to being more embedded, more embedded, more embedded. They like the one segment. They keep coming back for that one segment. Then you give them a shout out because they told you that they liked the segment. Suddenly, they can't miss an episode. They become the subscriber or the follower. So we start to move people up. Now, when they're a subscriber, this is when it becomes fascinating. So we give them extra access. We give them personal communications and meetups. Now, I use Podcast Movement as a great example of this. Podcast Movement facilitates so many fantastic pieces of the podcasting community. And one of those pieces is that we always do a meetup at Podcast Movement for our podcasters. We do bowling. We've done karaoke. I'm not very good at that. We've done all sorts of wonderful things. Go-karting that we've done. It's wonderful, all right? And we give people that extra access. Now, you don't have to do that. You can do that on a smaller scale. So what you can do is you can do virtual hangouts and so on and so forth. But the one thing that I particularly really like with this, so when someone's a subscriber, our job is to embed them more and more and more and more and more so that they become a fan. What's the single best way to do that? It's to give them FaceTime with you. So sure, a meetup is great. But I developed something back in 2015, actually, just around Podcast Movement, my first one, that I call a presence promise. A promise to be present. A presence promise. And every Friday, for the last 6 years, at 4 p.m. UK time, 11 a.m. Eastern, I have been live for 30 minutes in our Facebook group. Doesn't matter where I've been in the US at Podcast Movement. I've done it on the floor of Podcast Movement. I've done it in London when I've had a day off and I've just gone on for 30 minutes. I have been present because I promised to be. And anyone can come and they can ask me questions. I can do office hours about their podcast. They can do anything at all that they want regarding podcasting with me in that time. And I am fully present during that time. And I've done that for 6 years. So these people who listen to the podcast, they get to know me. They get to know that Sam and I moved house. They get to know that, there was a duck in the garden last week, which was weird. Why is there a duck there? And they get to know all these little things. And guess what? I get to know them. I get to know what's going on in their lives. And we become friends. And we actually genuinely get to know each other. People like Raf and Felicia and Jared and Dan and Gary Leland and everyone that we've got to know. It's all through personal communications. And you could do that with your audience with this presence promise, all right? So when someone's a subscriber, we nurture them with a presence promise. And then they become a fan. And, let's assume that someone says to me, Marco, which podcast conferences would you say that I should attend? I can afford to spend on one ticket. Well, go to Podcast Movement, obviously, because I'm a fan. And when someone says to someone that likes my content, hey, thinking about getting into podcasting, got any resources that you might recommend? Yes. Go and listen to Mark's podcast, the Podcast Accelerator. They become a fan and they advocate for you. So we've stepped them up so very much. But it's not in a crass way. It's not in like a naughty old school marketing way. It's in a very two-way, collaborative, genuinely friendly way. And that stands the test of time. So that's the listener acquisition flow. And it's very, very, very powerful. And you can develop and use that strategy as much as you want. You can take any element of it and you can work on one bit. So for example, let's assume that you've got 20 minutes today to work on your podcast. You could say, today, I'm going to work on that curated content piece, or I'm going to work on building one brand new segment into my podcast that people can relate to and that I can really market and that I can give people a shout out when they tell me that they've listened to. Okay. So you can work on this and you can strategize this. But for me, there is one piece of the puzzle that is vital that everyone should have. And that's the beginning. That's the lurker. How you get someone, once you've got them lurking, how you get someone to listen to that trailer and what you do with them when they've listened and when they are listening. Because this episode cycle, this content hamster wheel, that kind of automated social buffer stuff, sure, we need to be doing some of that. But suddenly it doesn't look enough, does it? When you think about those 5 stages, it doesn't look enough. Go and subscribe right now doesn't stand up to scrutiny for the long term. So what we have to do is, instead of that, go and subscribe, we got to send our calls to action to the bottom, to the lurker, to the trailer, which allows people to make a quick decision and is not asking too much. Okay. So this is the piece of the puzzle that everyone should really, really solidly fix. Okay. Now, the cool thing with this is your hosting platform like Captivate will just give you the opportunity to mark an episode as a trailer. When an episode is set as a trailer, Apple Podcasts and Spotify show that separately as a trailer. So you can even point people to those apps now and they'll go, yeah, okay, that's the trailer. Brilliant. Okay. I pin my trailer everywhere. Okay. This is the core tenet of this listener acquisition flow. Now, this is a little bit old, this screenshot. And I've actually replaced this just for a week or two with this podcast industry list. But it will be back next week. But I pop it on the top of my Twitter. It's always pinned. I stick it at the top of my website. It's always at the top of my podcast page on my website. It's the first thing people see. Oh, and then Jared, that screenshot of PME, Podcast Movement Evolutions, that is not on purpose. That's amazing. So this is the format that I want you to steal for the trailer. All right. This is the format. Now screenshot this, go ahead and just take it. So the format should be who you are, a short line on your background, aka why should I trust you? The days and times that you release your episodes, include if you might ever release bonus episodes as well. The format of your episodes, interview, solo, variety, story, narrative, how to find and where to find your podcast. Now, that's very important. Okay, so again, another screenshot. It's really important, and that blue and orange bit about halfway down this slide, it's vital to make sure that you tell people that your show is free to listen to and that it's available in any app that supports podcasts. That's for the people that don't know about podcasts, who are sort of thinking, well, I like Star Wars. I don't know what a podcast is. What's this audio thing all about? Like, let's make it really easy for them. All right. So let's let them understand that it's free and it's in any podcast app that they might have on their phone already. Just do a search in your phone for podcast and you can probably find an app. Okay. You search for the show and off you go. So remember, not everyone knows what a podcast is. Now, a couple of other little bits on this trailer. It's 120 seconds long, no longer in my view, because it's too much. Okay. It's too much. And then no long music introduction. You can have a music bed running underneath, but if the first 15 or 20 seconds of your audio is like a fancy intro that you've had produced, like I'm switched off. The point of this is to get me into understanding what your content is about. So you can have some bed music running underneath it, a nice little music bed, but no big intro music that takes up like 15, 20 seconds. And I highly recommend as well that you go ahead and you do curate an episode as well within your trailer. So during your trailer, you've analyzed your analytics from Captivate. You've seen that over the last 2 months, your downloads are, the highest for episode 265, which is all about how to understand how many downloads you need to monetize your podcast. So you include that curation in this trailer. You'll say something like, I highly recommend the first episode is episode 265, entitled How Many Downloads Do You Need to Monetize Your Podcast? And I recommend that because that's the episode that most of my listeners have found the most useful over the last 30 to 60 days. There's a link in the episode notes, and here's a call to action in the Captivate player where if you click on it, it will take you directly to that episode. So remember, that curation is key, okay? So the thing that we've got to remember is that this is what it's about for us, okay? People aren't downloads. Our goal is to get more genuine listeners, all right? More genuine people listening to our podcast. And the way to do that is to be more human. So that's the prez. Thank you very much. Let me know if there are any questions. Jared, just throw the questions at me at any point. But yes.
Well, I think we should do that. Well, this is something that I wanted to hear your take on here. This is the little bit of info and updating the trailer with a call to action to another episode seems like a great idea. This little nugget was worth my time. Can you just kind of touch on that for people that were like, whoa, let's break that down a little bit more. Obviously, this is very valuable to Mr. Schumacher here. So,
well, thank you very much, sir. This is a really interesting tidbit, and it's sort of the missing bridge between the here's a sample of what you could have, and that kind of next step, which is here's the bit that you should really go and get. Because a lot of people, we know what it's like. You and I have been in that situation, Jared, where you just, you're tired, you're hungry, you don't really know what you want to eat. So the first thing that you see, like, I'll just eat or drink that thing. We've all been jet lagged. We've been on flights. It's the same kind of decision-making process for people who are listening to a podcast trailer. Like, they just want to be given the next thing to do. So what I always try and find is very useful with this is that there's a reason that when I log into Captivate and I look at my download analytics and I sort by, the last 60 days and I look at the most downloaded episode, there is clearly a reason that episode was downloaded the most. And it's usually because it's the thing that people found most entertaining or the most useful. So by bridging the gap and saying to someone, you've listened to the trailer, now go ahead and listen to this other very useful episode, you can be sure that they are getting what is perceived to be the best experience of your podcast. Because a lot of the time, what we perceive to be our best episode is not what the audience thinks, because we might be having a great day and we're on form and our voice is warmed up and we're having a real good go at it. But the information in another episode, a nugget stuck out to that many people that's the one that got the downloads. So it allows us to step out of our own sort of psyche, look at the data and give people the best first experience of the podcast. And I think it's a really useful thing that not enough people do,
Absolutely. Here's another one, and I think you might have briefly touched on this, but this is about episode length. Do you find people listen to short episodes more so than the longer? So an example would be like 15 minutes versus 45.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, this. I personally have had no experience of either episode format being better. And I'm saying that from the point of view of running podcasts that go both those lengths. The one thing that I will say is that you have to be very confident in your content being able to really engage people. And one of the biggest mistakes that I see people making is that they try and do a short podcast because they think short will be better, but they don't deliver enough value, or it's not high quality enough, or it's not in depth enough. And they get the same content elsewhere, and it might be 10 minutes longer, but it's much more in depth. So you sort of lose a listener. Or you go the other way and you try and drag it to 45 minutes, and you sort of end up filling, and you end up really talking and repeating yourself, and not in a really good teachable way, but in just a I have got to pad the time kind of manner. So what I'd say with that one, Karen, is you've got to really plan your episodes in such a way that you hit all the marks, that you're doing the education that you need, or you've got the guest lined up properly, and you're doing a really high quality interview, for example. But the second, and we know this as podcasters, like we can feel when the energy is dropping a little bit. And at that point, that's when you start to think, well, wait a sec, I've either got to bring this back in and really up the ante again, or that's a really good signal that it's time, So the other kind of, I suppose, the other add-on to that is, this is only circumstantial evidence that I've got based on the shows that I do. The how-to content, when it's not intended to be a real deep dive tutorial, the sort of inspirational, here's a thing you can do today stuff, that does, for me at least, perform better at 15 minutes or so. So that's the only caveat that I'd add on that one, Karen. But it's a common and insightful question.
Another question we have: can you talk about the curation of segments for a listener and give some examples?
Yeah, I love this. I'm all over this. And Jared, when I get you on the new show that I'm just planning, you'll have some first-hand experience of some of the segments that I'm planning. So the idea with the segment is that you can attract a listener as well as anyone, but unless they stick, you've lost them. All right. So our job with the segment is to have more arrows in the quiver that we can target people with. That's a really weird example. Someone said that to me yesterday, and I found it weird then as well. But the idea that you've got all these arrows in the quiver that you can use to just really target the right sort of people. So if you've got a segment that is like the news segment, like we've got with the Star Wars show, some people tune in just for that. Some people tune in for the random spotlight, which is 10 minutes at the end. And some people tune in for the review and discussion, or the This Week in Star Wars History segment. Now, they might listen to the rest of the show, but it's that one thing that they really, really like. A great example of this is like the old Thunderbirds TV show. I don't know if you had that in the States, the old Jerry Anderson sort of Super Mario Nation Thunderbirds, like Captain Scarlet and Stingray and all that sort of stuff. But they had this introduction, right? And it showed all these spacecraft. And there were two versions of the introduction. There was version 1, which was a really watered down version. Then there was version 2 that showed like the characters transforming, like in a Batman style. They go into a cave and they go down these slides into the Thunderbird and they all take off. I watched that show religiously for the 5% of the times that better version of the intro came on. I was hooked to the show for that one particular piece. And when it came on, it was pure elation. So that's a way of hooking people in. Now, the curation of it is a really interesting thing, because you can get a little bit deeper on this, like with some audience research and so on. But if you really tune into what your listeners are really, really enjoying, you can double down on that. So what you can do is you can release a Christmas bonus episode that rounds up all of the random spotlight segments for 2021. And you put that out as a bonus episode. So that's the elation that I felt when the Thunderbirds intro was on, the long version of it. You drop that bonus episode for someone and it's suddenly, wow, all of this is for me. So what that allows you to do is really build the fan base up. Now, one of the very interesting byproduct of that is, I talked about things like the Presence Promise and doing the meetups and so on and so forth. What you find happening as a byproduct of those little segments and that curation of them is that when you do a meetup, or when you do an event, or when you do an online summit, or whether you do like the Presence Promise, like the Facebook Lives, people start talking amongst themselves about their favorite bits because they've got something to hook to. And then these little pockets start to form. The 10 people that love this segment hang out over here. The 10 people that love this segment hang out over here. And then all you can do is you can put a big brand net around them and really nurture them into being a really solid fan base. So I'm fascinated by that idea. I think it's a great idea for anyone. I love it, honestly.
Well, I think we're wrapping it up here at the end. Sarah Nicholas, of course, says thanks for taking the time out of your day to talk with us. And then there's several others that are showing their appreciation, rightfully so. Mark, for people that want to maybe connect with you and maybe they have another question or they just want to kind of keep tabs on the innovations and things that are coming up, how can they do that?
Well, thank you, Jared. Always a pleasure. And thank you to everyone that's attended. It means a heck of a lot. The easiest place is Twitter. That's my place for conversation. So I'm just at Mr. Asquith over on Twitter, and it'd be a delight to chat with people over there.
Yeah, we'll put that in the chat here. It's Mr. Asquith. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. It is, yeah. MR Asquith. Someone had Mark Asquith. Can you believe it?
Okay. We'll make sure. And you had a nice Twitter chat going about a week ago. They got some love in Pod News and a couple other places. So, right.
Yeah, thank you,
man. Always some good dialogue going on over there. So I hope people will reach out and say hello and say thank you for joining us today. All right, Mark, we're grateful and absolutely wish you the best. I'm hopeful that things allow you to be in Nashville in August, but if not, I'm sure we'll see you soon. And please continue to take care and thank you for what you do for the community.
Likewise, sir. Really missing you guys and missing seeing you in particular. So yeah, thanks for having me. Thank you to everyone that's turned up and yeah, keep doing your thing. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone.